Wait, hold up, because this one is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, relationships, and the so-called perfect celebrity image. Imagine walking into a situation you were never supposed to see. A moment so shocking, so unexpected, that it flips your entire reality upside down in seconds. Now imagine that moment involving people you never expected to even be connected in the same sentence, let alone the same room. Sounds like a plot twist from a hit reality show, right? But what if I told you that behind the glitz, the cameras, and the carefully curated public image, there's a story that's way messier than anything we've seen on screen? Because tonight, we're diving into a situation that has fans talking, theories flying, and timelines completely divided. Allegations, rumors, and whispers that just won't stay quiet. The kind of story where everyone involved has something to lose, and everything to hide. So the real question is, what actually happened behind closed doors? And more importantly, who's telling the truth? Stay tuned, because once you hear this, you're not going to look at this story the same way again. What makes a story like this spread faster than anything else isn't just the shock, it's the mystery. Because the moment you hear a claim this big, your first instinct isn't even disbelief, it's curiosity. You start asking questions. You start connecting dots that may or may not even exist. And before you know it, the story takes on a life of its own, growing louder with every retelling, more dramatic with every click, and more intense with every theory thrown into the mix. That's exactly the kind of energy surrounding this situation right now. People aren't just reacting, they're investigating, analyzing, and rethinking every past interaction, every public appearance, and every quiet moment that once seemed meaningless but now feels like it might have been part of something much bigger. Because when a name like Kandi Burruss enters the conversation, you're not just talking about another celebrity. You're talking about someone who has spent years building a reputation rooted in strength, intelligence, and control. Someone who has navigated the entertainment world with a level of composure that commands respect. So when a story begins to surface that challenges that image, even slightly, the reaction is immediate. People lean in. They pay attention. And they want to know every single detail, whether it's confirmed or not. And then you have the other names tied into this narrative. Todd, a figure often associated with stability and partnership, now being viewed through a completely different lens. Not because of what is proven, but because of what is being suggested, implied, and speculated about in conversations across social platforms. That shift alone is enough to change how people interpret everything from past interviews to old photos. Suddenly, nothing is just normal anymore. Everything becomes a clue. Everything becomes suspicious. And then there's Porsha, a personality who has always lived in the public eye, often surrounded by headlines, discussions, and moments that spark strong opinions. Whether people support her or criticize her, she is undeniably someone who draws attention. And in a story like this, attention is exactly what amplifies everything. The more people talk, the more the narrative expands. The more the narrative expands, the harder it becomes to separate what's real from what's imagined. That's the key to understanding how a situation like this evolves. It doesn't start as a fully formed story. It starts as a whisper, a comment, a suggestion, something vague enough that people can interpret it in multiple ways. And once that seed is planted, it begins to grow, fueled by speculation, curiosity, and the constant demand for answers. Every new post, every reaction video, every comment thread adds another layer to the story, whether it's accurate or not. And that's where things get complicated. Because once a narrative reaches that level of visibility, truth and fiction start to blend together in a way that's hard to untangle. People begin to believe the version of the story that fits their perspective, their expectations, or even their emotions. And that's when the conversation shifts from what happened to what people think happened. In situations like this, the past becomes just as important as the present. People start digging into old interviews, resurfacing clips, revisiting moments that were once dismissed as harmless or irrelevant. Now those same moments are being reinterpreted under a completely different light. A glance that once seemed casual is now analyzed for meaning. A comment that once felt light-hearted is now examined for hidden intent. It's almost like the entire history of everyone involved is being rewritten in real time by public perception. And the reaction isn't quiet. It's loud. It's fast. It spreads across every platform imaginable. People aren't just consuming the story, they're participating in it. Creating theories. Arguing with each other. Defending their favorite personalities while questioning others. It becomes less about the actual facts and more about the emotional investment people have in the story itself. But what keeps people coming back is the possibility that there might be more to this than what's being said out loud. That there could be hidden details. Unseen interactions. Pieces of information that haven't surfaced yet. That sense of what if is powerful. It keeps the conversation alive long after the initial moment has passed. And as the story continues to circulate, the pressure builds on everyone involved, whether they are directly connected to the narrative or simply caught in the middle of it. Public image becomes a fragile thing, something that can shift overnight based on perception alone. Careers, reputations, and relationships all become part of the larger conversation, even when there is no verified confirmation of the claims being made. That's the reality of modern storytelling in the digital age. The line between entertainment and truth is thinner than ever. And once a story like this enters the public space, it doesn't just belong to the people involved anymore. It belongs to everyone watching, reacting, and interpreting it in their own way. And right now, that story is still unfolding. New opinions are forming. New reactions are being shared. And the questions that started this entire conversation are still hanging in the air, unanswered, driving even more curiosity as time goes on. Because at the end of the day, what people really want isn't just the story itself. It's the truth behind it. The real version. The part that hasn't been told yet. And until that moment comes, if it ever does, the speculation continues, the conversation grows, and the story keeps evolving in ways no one can fully control. The moment a story reaches this level, it stops being just about what was said and starts becoming about how people interpret what they think they heard. And that shift changes everything. Because now, every platform becomes a stage. Every comment becomes a statement. Every reaction becomes part of the narrative. And the line between truth and speculation becomes almost impossible to see clearly anymore. As the discussion spreads, new layers begin to form. People start claiming they have insider information. Anonymous accounts appear, dropping vague hints and cryptic messages that only fuel the fire further. These so-called sources rarely provide anything concrete, but they don't need to. Their job isn't to confirm anything, it's to keep the conversation alive, to keep people guessing, and to push the story into new and unpredictable directions. And that's exactly what's happening here. The more people talk, the more the story evolves. It shifts shape depending on who's telling it and who's listening. Some people frame it as a betrayal. Others treat it as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. And then there are those who believe there's a deeper, more calculated layer to everything, something hidden just beneath the surface that hasn't been exposed yet. What's interesting is how quickly people latch onto certain narratives. Once a version of the story starts to feel convincing, even if it's not verified, it gains traction. People begin repeating it, resharing it, and building on it. And with each repetition, the story gains more weight, more credibility in the eyes of those who haven't looked deeper into it. This is where things become dangerous, not in a physical sense, but in terms of perception. Because once a story reaches a certain level of virality, it becomes difficult to separate what's been confirmed from what's been assumed. And for the people at the center of it, that distinction matters more than anything else. Public perception can change overnight. One moment, someone is seen in a positive light, admired for their work, their personality, or their public image. And the next moment, based on speculation alone, that same image begins to shift. People start questioning everything. Every past interaction gets re-evaluated. Every public appearance gets scrutinized. And suddenly, the narrative isn't about who they are, it's about what people think they might have done. That's the reality of being in the spotlight. Everything is magnified. Every detail is amplified. And every rumor has the potential to grow into something much bigger than it ever was intended to be. Meanwhile, the audience isn't passive in all of this. They're actively participating. Comment sections turn into debate zones. People defend their perspective with strong opinions. Others challenge those opinions with equal intensity. It becomes a back-and-forth cycle, where the story is constantly being reshaped by the audience itself. And in that environment, truth becomes just one of many possibilities. Not necessarily the dominant one. Not necessarily the one that spreads the fastest. Just one piece of a much larger puzzle that may never be fully assembled. As the days go on, the story doesn't fade. If anything, it grows stronger. More people discover it. More reactions are posted. More discussions are started. And each new wave of attention brings new interpretations, new angles, and new theories about what might have happened. But what's most fascinating is how this kind of narrative doesn't rely on confirmation to survive. It thrives on uncertainty. The lack of clear answers is what keeps people engaged. The unanswered questions are what keep the curiosity alive. And the possibility that there might be more to uncover is what keeps people coming back. This is where the power of storytelling becomes undeniable. Because whether or not something is proven, the way it's told can influence how it's perceived. Tone, pacing, and presentation all play a role in shaping the audience's reaction. And in a case like this, where the narrative is built on speculation and interpretation, those elements become even more important. The way this story spreads isn't random, it follows a pattern. It starts with a strong hook. Something shocking enough to grab attention. Then it builds, layer by layer, adding details, reactions, and supposed insights that deepen the intrigue. And just when it feels like it's reaching a conclusion, it pulls back, leaving the audience with more questions than answers. That cycle keeps repeating itself. And with each repetition, the audience becomes more invested. They're no longer just watching, they're actively trying to solve the story themselves. But here's where things get even more complicated. As theories multiply, so do contradictions. One version of the story might directly conflict with another. And yet, both can exist simultaneously in the public space. Both can gain traction. Both can be believed by different groups of people. That's the nature of viral narratives. They don't require consistency. They only require attention. And attention, once gained, is difficult to lose. As more voices join the conversation, the narrative becomes even more fragmented. Different interpretations emerge, each shaped by personal bias, previous perceptions, and emotional reactions. And in that environment, it becomes nearly impossible to point to a single, unified version of the story. But that doesn't stop people from trying. Analysts, commentators, and everyday viewers begin breaking down every possible angle. They look at timelines. They examine interactions. They try to piece together a sequence of events that makes sense, even if the foundation of the story itself remains unverified. And while all of this is happening, the people involved, at least in the narrative being discussed, are left at the center of a storm they didn't directly create. Their names are being mentioned, their actions are being debated, and their reputations are being shaped by a conversation that continues to grow without their direct control. That's the part most people don't think about. Once a story reaches this scale, it takes on a life of its own. It no longer depends on the original source. It evolves independently, driven by the audience, the platform, and the sheer momentum of viral attention. And that momentum doesn't slow down easily. In fact, it often builds. Because the more people question the story, the more people feel the need to respond to it. And the more responses there are, the more visibility the story gains. It's a self-sustaining cycle that feeds itself through engagement. At this stage, the story isn't just about what happened, it's about what people believe happened. And those beliefs can vary widely, depending on who you ask. Some see it as a scandal. Others see it as exaggerated drama. And some see it as nothing more than a product of internet speculation taken too far. But regardless of perspective, one thing remains clear: the story has captured attention. And once attention is captured at this level, it's incredibly difficult to let go. Because now, the audience isn't just waiting for answers. They're expecting them. And that expectation changes everything. As the story reaches its breaking point, something interesting happens. Everything starts to slow down, but the tension doesn't. In fact, it gets heavier. Because when a narrative has been stretched this far, when it has been debated, analyzed, and reinterpreted from every possible angle, the only thing left is the expectation of resolution. The audience wants an answer, a conclusion, something definitive that either confirms or completely dismantles everything they've been hearing. But in situations like this, resolution isn't always clean. It's rarely simple. And more often than not, it's not even satisfying to those who've been following the story from the beginning. Because the truth, when it finally arrives, doesn't always match the version that people have built in their minds. And that's where things get complicated. At this stage, the conversation shifts again. People begin to step back and ask themselves a different set of questions. Not just what happened, but why did this story become so big in the first place? What made people latch onto it so quickly? What made it spread so far? And why does it feel like this narrative has taken on a life of its own, beyond the control of anyone involved? That's when the deeper analysis begins. Not just of the story itself, but of the environment that allowed it to grow. Social media, audience engagement, and the constant demand for content all play a role in shaping how quickly something can evolve from a small rumor into a widespread conversation. And once that happens, the story is no longer just about the individuals at the center, it becomes about the audience too. Because every share, every comment, every reaction contributes to the momentum. Every person who engages with the story becomes part of its growth. And in that sense, the audience isn't just observing, they're participating. That's why stories like this are so powerful. They don't just exist in one place. They exist everywhere at once. On timelines, in comment sections, in reaction videos, in discussions between friends. The story becomes something that lives and breathes across multiple platforms simultaneously. And even when it slows down, it doesn't disappear. It lingers. But eventually, the attention begins to shift. New topics emerge. New stories take over the spotlight. And the narrative that once dominated the conversation starts to fade into the background. However, that doesn't mean it's forgotten. Because in many cases, stories like this leave behind a lasting impression. They influence how people view the individuals involved. They shape opinions. They create narratives that stick, even if the original claims were never fully confirmed. And that's where the impact becomes long-term. Reputation, once affected, doesn't always return to its original state. Public perception can be difficult to reverse, especially when it's been influenced by a story that spread as widely as this one. Even if the details remain unclear, the association often remains. But at the same time, not everything is negative. In some cases, being at the center of a viral story can actually increase visibility. It can generate more attention, more discussions, and in some cases, even more opportunities. That's the paradox of viral narratives. They can damage and elevate at the same time. They can create criticism and curiosity simultaneously. And they can turn private moments into public discussions that never truly end. As the story continues to echo across different spaces, one thing becomes increasingly clear: the audience is still divided. There is no single conclusion that everyone agrees on. No unified version of events. Just a collection of interpretations, opinions, and theories that continue to circulate. And that division is what keeps the story alive. Because as long as people are debating, the conversation doesn't end. But eventually, the intensity starts to fade. The headlines move on. The reactions slow down. And the focus shifts elsewhere. Still, the questions remain. What actually happened in this story? How much of what was said can be trusted? And how much of it was shaped by perception, speculation, and the natural tendency of the internet to amplify anything that feels even slightly controversial? Those questions may never be answered fully. And maybe that's part of the reason why stories like this are so compelling. Because they don't give you everything. They leave gaps. They leave space for interpretation. And in that space, people create their own version of the truth. But if there's one thing this entire situation shows, it's that stories don't just happen, they are built. Layer by layer. Interaction by interaction. Reaction by reaction. Until they become something much bigger than the original moment that started it all. And once that happens, There's no single person in control anymore. The story belongs to everyone. And at that point, the question is no longer just about what happened. It's about what people choose to believe. And that's where this story leaves us. Not with answers, but with questions. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what keeps it alive. Before we wrap this up, let's be real for a second. Because stories like this don't just disappear once the video ends. They live in your mind, they spark conversations, and they leave you questioning what you thought you knew. And that's exactly why this one hit different. Whether you believe every word, doubt every claim, or sit somewhere in between, one thing is clear. This narrative got your attention, and it's not letting go that easily. So now I want to hear from you. What's your take on all of this? Do you think there's more to the story than what's being said? Or is this just another case of the internet turning whispers into a full-blown storm? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is where the real conversation begins. And if you're the kind of person who loves digging into stories like this, breaking them down, and staying ahead of the drama before anyone else even catches on, then you already know what to do. Make sure you like this video, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications, because the next story might just be even bigger than this one. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.